Good evening. This is the Response to COVID-19 program on TDT and TDT Live Online on Facebook. I'm Vidya Ramphal. Today is World Day Against Child Labor. In 2020, this observance focuses on the impact of the COVID-19 crisis on child labor. Now, COVID-19 health pandemic is expected or could rather push millions of vulnerable children into child labor. Already there is an estimated 152 million children in child labor all over the world, with 72 million of which are in hazardous labor. Today on the Response to COVID-19 program, we welcome Ms. Kevar Cummings Williams, Deputy Permanent Secretary, Ministry of Labor and Small Enterprise Development, and also the Chair of the National Steering Committee for the Prevention and Elimination of Child Labor. We also say hello and welcome to Ms. Resel Melville, of the National Project Coordinator of the Regional Initiative on Child Labor with the ILO, that's the International Labour Organization, and also welcome to Mr. Farouk Mohammed, Labour Inspector to Ministry of Labour and Small Enterprise Development. Welcome to you all. Thanks so much for being on with us today. Let's start with you, Mr. Mohammed. First of all, could you tell us what exactly is child labour and how bad is the problem here in Trinidad and Tobago?
Good afternoon, Vidya, and thanks very much for having us. Child labor in Trinidad and Tobago is not as prominent or as visible as other regions in the world. But we do suspect that there are cases, particularly in rural areas, in the informal sector, in private homes where there may be small businesses as well as domestic work, and even on small farms. But currently we lack data on the situation of child labor in Trinidad and Tobago. Therefore, some research is needed to really understand our situation. The public as well may lack knowledge as to what is and what is not child labor. And we have developed, certain cultural, social norms over generations. But it is critical for the public to be aware of what is child labor and what is not child labor.
Now, who, as I mentioned, represents the ILO, the International Labour Organization. How bad is the problem internationally? I mentioned some stats there, but how bad is the problem internationally, and what are some of the areas where you'd find the most in terms of child labor?
Good evening. Thank you for that question. And as you correctly quoted, yes, the most recent statistics which we would have published on the international situation for child labor point to at least 152 million children in child labor. The great news is that Latin America and the Caribbean is one of the regions globally that shows the most progress in this. The 2017 statistics have shown that for Latin America and the Caribbean, we had a 10% decrease over the last 4 years in the total number of children who find themselves or who have been found in situations of child labor. So across Latin America and the Caribbean, we currently have an estimated 10.5 million children still in child labor. Now, one of the even better pieces of news that the statistics allow us to see is that there are fairly low levels of incidence in the Caribbean sub-region. But as Farouk would have mentioned in his introduction, there are some concerns that still remain about the existence of some of the worst forms of child labor and the persistence of child labor in other forms in the Caribbean.
Yeah, and as you mentioned there, Ms. Melville, there are some ongoing issues, and despite the low stats, as you mentioned, it's one of despite the current situation is that the ministry, or rather the government, has put together a steering committee to deal with the problem, and that is led, of course, by Ms. Kevar Cummings Williams. Ms. Williams, could you tell us about the work of the committee and how long it's been in place?
All right, good evening. The National Steering Committee for the Prevention and Elimination of Child Labor was established in February 2019. And to date, we have recognized that child labor is It's not only a labor issue, but it's a cross-cutting issue. In that regard, we would have the committee comprises representatives from a wide cross-section of government organizations, NGOs, and academia. And of course, the mandate of the committee is to mitigate the negative impact child labor has on national development. It is mandated to oversee the implementation of critical activities associated with the prevention and elimination of child labor in Trinidad and Tobago. And these include the conduct of research to better understand the enabling factors and root causes of child labor. The committee has also been charged with the responsibility of developing a national child labor policy and action plan. And the aim is also to make recommendations to strengthen the capacity of the Labor Inspectorate Unit, who has the ultimate responsibility on the Ministry of Labor's mandate to ensure that the enforcement of laws and the enforcement of the laws of the employment of young persons.
Right. So the steering committee is in place, as Ms. Melville would have stated. It's a very low figure here in Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean. And Mr. Mohammed would have also stated that there is, in terms of his opening remarks, he would have said, spoken about define the problem for us. I just want to come back to what the day is all about. It's all about the effect of COVID-19 this year on child labor. In terms of this, what do you expect will be the outcome of COVID-19 and how it will affect these children in poorer countries and in poverty-stricken situations?
The program, the celebration or collaboration this year is primarily to build that awareness so persons would understand, as Mr. Mohammed would have said, what is child labor. I'm not sure that persons fully understand what child labor is, so that in identifying those incidences of child labor, it may be difficult for persons to identify if they're not aware of how child labor is defined. So our sensitization campaign, primarily as due to the restrictions of COVID-19, is primarily utilizing social media platforms, and it's primarily to sensitize Trinidad and Tobago on what is child labor and how they can spot it, so that down the road we can put measures in place to eliminate child labor in Trinidad and Tobago.
So how exactly do we spot it then? And Mr. Mohammed and Ms. Melville can jump in here if you like. How easy is it to spot in light of those cultural norms, as Mr. Mohammed would have pointed out?
Okay, I should mention that child labor is defined as work that deprives children of their childhood, their potential, their dignity, and which can be harmful to their physical and their mental development. A child is defined as someone who is under the age of 18 years. However, Trinidad and Tobago has declared 16 years as the minimum age for employment in Trinidad and Tobago. But there are some restrictions with respect to their employment from 16 to 18 years. And the age of 16 years is in harmony with our education legislation, which provides for a child to be in school from 5 to 15 years. But there are some exceptions to that. So, for example, a child under the age of 16 years can work in the family business. They can assist, but however, it must not interfere with their education, their time to do homework, time for leisure, time to play, etc. In fact, some activities carried out by children can be considered positive. For example, doing chores at home, helping out the parents in the home, in the family business. Some of these activities can be positive, a good experience. It can teach the child responsibility, skills, and attitudes, and it can contribute to the child's development and prepare them for adulthood.
Yes, Mr. Mohammed there. Well, we'll hear more about the effect of COVID-19 on child labor coming up in just a little bit. First of all, we have a short break. We'll be back with more with our guests, Ms. Kevar Cummings Williams, Ms. Resel Melville, and Mr. Farouk Mohammed here on the Response to COVID-19 program. Welcome back to the Response to COVID-19 program here on TTT and TTT Live Online. I'm Vidya Ramphal. Before the break, we were talking about the effect of COVID-19 and the possible effects of what it could have on children who are involved, who are being forced to labor. Let's go to the ILO representative, Ms. Resel Melville. And what do you expect will happen internationally, given that what is happening now with COVID-19 is still ongoing? We don't know when the end will come, but what are the figures? What do you think will happen in terms of child labor internationally?
Thanks for that, Vidya. One of the things I want to share is that over the last 3 days, the ILO has published, along with the UN ECLAC, a technical note which explicitly lays out our concerns as it relates to the possibility that COVID-19 will increase child labor in Latin America and the Caribbean. And on the occasion of World Day Against Child Labor, the ILO has also launched a report with UNICEF, which again reiterates that in a time of crisis, it's a time for us to act to prevent the worsening of the situation regarding child labor across the globe. And so just to, for example, state some facts, the UN ECLAC would have estimated that as one of the economic impacts of COVID, over 31 million jobs would have been lost in Latin America and the Caribbean. And having lost 31 million jobs, or having a forecast of 31 million jobs lost, we expect that families would have lost income, individuals would be pushed into situations that are precarious, they would be in situations of poverty. And of course, increased poverty is going to be one of those key factors that increases the vulnerability of children, as families may have to rely on children entering into work or taking up forms of work that could be dangerous or hazardous just for the mere survival of the family. And so the various channels through which the impact of COVID is being felt are explicitly laid out in these publications. And just to mention as well, we have currently over 115 children who are out of school because of COVID. And I say 115 because we are covering Latin America and the Caribbean. And so when children are out of school, school in many instances provides protective spaces for our children. That's why we have school feeding programs, so that those whose parents are at some of the lower socioeconomic levels can allow them to have meals. It's also a safe space, sometimes from physical abuse. And so we now have these children who are out of school, who are forced into situations where their families are losing income. And so the push for them to begin to look for work or to take underpaid work or to undertake hazardous work is a very real and serious risk. And so we are looking at a reversal of the positive trends that I would have mentioned earlier in terms of the decrease in child labor in Latin America and the Caribbean. And so the ILO has been working with the governments as well as with other international partners within the UN system to really and truly show the data that justifies this very grave concern.
Now, Ms. Cummings-Williams, as you would have heard there, the trend was really moving towards having less in terms of child labor here in the Caribbean. Credit really has to go to the ministry for still bringing in the steering committee to deal with an issue which many felt was on the decline. Now, COVID-19 has come about. What has been going through your mind as you've seen this particular pandemic unfold, and in terms of thinking, well, the problem could become a lot worse within the next few years or so?
Indeed, and that again would be the reason we would keep pushing with this sensitization campaign to make persons more aware of what child labor is and to also make them aware of how they can spot it. We also have our Labor Inspectorate Unit and the other agencies like the Children's Authority, the Counter-Trafficking Unit, who are also members of the committee who partner with us in identifying and bringing that support so that we can put initiatives in place to support the children of Trinidad and Tobago.
Well, in terms of spotting it, I don't know if you could just give us a few ideas of how exactly you spot child labor?
That is Mr. Mohammed said he's labor inspector and he's on the field doing exactly
Sure, no
that.
problem. Let's let Mr. Mohammed tackle that one.
Yes, thank you. So we labor inspectors, we receive reports from members of the public, uh, and we would send the labor inspector to investigate, to ensure that the information that comes to us is it's really a situation of child labor. In addition, we do go out and do routine inspections, looking at situations, checking registers from the employers, verifying the age, and ensuring, that there are no children under the age of 16 in employment, and also those who are from 16 to 18 are not exposed to any hazardous work, dangerous work, and they are not working nights, for example.
Right, so those are some of the ways in which we can spot it. Now, in terms of the effects of child labor, I know any of you all can come in here and deal with this one, but if this problem is not contained, if the governments the government of Trinidad and Tobago and governments around the region don't deal with it, what could be the possible outcomes of the effects on the generation if child labor is left unchecked? Yes, we could get a response perhaps, yeah?
Yes, thank you. Sorry, we were just working through the technologies of muting and unmuting.
That's all right.
And so, to respond to that, one of the things that we've been working to make explicit for people to understand, there is a link between child labor and, for example, your youth employment. A child who is prevented from enjoying their childhood, from completing their education, who begins to work in an unskilled, low-paid job, can often become trapped at one level. He doesn't have the opportunity to develop his potential through academic and other endeavors or skills training. And so his potential is capped. And so we can see that that leads to intergenerational cycles of poverty. Again, if our young persons are not allowed to have the freedoms and enjoy the rights to develop while they are children and not be forced to work in either dangerous or illegal circumstances, then we also reduce our national productivity overall, because one of the aims of the government is to produce and to fully take advantage of or to fully enjoy a productive society, a productive labor market. Child labor, because it interferes with a child's education, it can interfere with their physical development, their mental and social well-being, brings a halt to the potential future that these children and the country could have. So I hope that that explains a little bit some of the impact that we are already trying to prevent from having children slide further into situations of child labor.
Well, it certainly does really put it very well indeed, Ms. Melville. We're just about coming up to the end. I know the 20 minutes goes really fast, but in terms of a final comment, let's start with you, Mr. Mohammed. A final comment as perhaps you, for the listeners and the viewers here on TDT about child labor here in Trinidad and Tobago.
Well, thank you. We have laws in Trinidad and Tobago that protect the rights of children. For example, there's Children's Act of 2012. We also have the Trafficking in Persons Act and also the Occupational Safety and Health Act. We have different agencies who monitor these different pieces of legislation, the Labor Inspectorate Unit of the Ministry of Labor. We have the Counter Trafficking Unit, the Child Protection Unit, and also the Occupational Safety and Health Agency. They all get together to protect children. But in addition to those, there are also different agencies that would work towards preventing child labor, which is equally important as well. We have support services, for example, from the Children's Authority of Trinidad and Tobago. If we find a child in a labor situation, we would want to remove the child from that situation and have them some sort of support service available so that they do not end up back in the labor situation. So that's where the Children's Authority comes in, the Ministry of Education comes in, the Ministry of Social Development, if it's a poverty issue, to come and support that services, as well as
Yes.
there are NGOs like Childline that provide psychological support for children.
All right.
So
Well,
we're saying there's no need to resort to
yes.
using children in child labor. There are a number of social support services available, and there's more information available on our website.
All right.
On
Well,
our
Mr.
social
Mohammed,
media.
thanks so much for that. Yes, it's certainly a lot of great insight here from our guest today. We'll have to close it off at this point, but thanks very much to Mr. Farouk Mohammed. Also, we heard from Ms. Resel Melville and Ms. Kevar Cummings Williams. Thanks very much for being on with us and consenting to share your views on child labor here in Trinidad and Tobago and the rest of the world. Now, remember, for continued coverage, you can join us here on TDT, Talk City 91.1 FM, Suite 100, Next 99.1 FM, as well as on Facebook at TDT Live Online for all your COVID-19 updates. Thanks so much for joining us. On behalf of the TDT crew, I'm Vidya Ramphal. Bye for now.